Hi, this is Dennis Dalton, the safety officer for the Rocky Mountain Flight Training Center, and this is the March safety meeting briefing for the Peterson Air Force Base Aero Club for March 30th, 2021. The title of this one is It's a Zoo Out There, a review of the Bird Wildlife Strike Hazard Program, referred to as BASH. So our first question is, at what altitude is an aircraft most likely to collide with a bird? Between the ground and 500 feet? Between 500 feet and 1,500 feet above the ground? Or at cruise altitudes? And the answer is, according to a recently released report, it's 500 feet or less above the ground. But collisions that did more damage to aircraft intended to occur up higher. Everyone knows about the emergency forced landing of U.S. Airways Flight 1549 Airbus 320 into the Hudson River on January 15, 2009, which demonstrated to the world the severity of aircraft collisions with birds and other wildlife. Migratory Canada geese were ingested in both engines at 3:27 p.m. at an altitude of 2,818 feet above the ground level and 4.5 miles northwest of the approach end of runway 22 at LaGuardia. 3 minutes, 49 seconds later, the aircraft successfully ditched into the Hudson River with 150 passengers and 5 crew. There were no fatalities. Canadian geese, the population of resident non-migratory Canadian geese in the USA increased fourfold from about 1.1 million to 4.4 million birds, 1990 to 2019. The resident population now outnumbers the migratory population that nests primarily in northern Canada and winters in the US. From 1990 to 2019, there were almost 2,000 strikes involving Canada geese and civil aircraft that were reported, 71 in 2019. Resident geese comprise an estimated 76% of these strikes. You know, that and many other safety pointers about collisions between wildlife and aircraft were gleaned from 30 years of data crunched in wildlife strikes to civil aircraft in the United States, 1990 to 2019. I will refer to a lot of these different things as I go through this presentation today that I read out of this report, which will just help to kind of clarify the BASH program and our requirements at the Aero Club here to be aware of that and to file any reports. This report here was issued in February 2019 by the FAA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Service, and a document worth perusal by any pilot. It cites National Wildlife Strike Database data indicating that 82% of bird strikes occur at or below 1,500 feet above ground level, encompassing the altitudes at which we practice ground reference maneuvers and fly most general aviation airport traffic patterns. Now, as for surface operations, the report addresses the where and when of collisions with terrestrial animals. Evidently, they are more likely at night and more probable on arrival than on departure, and with some seasonal concentration. From 1990 to 2019, 53% of bird strikes occurred between July and October. 29% of deer strikes occurred in October and November. Terrestrial animals are more likely to be struck at night, 62%, whereas birds are struck more often during the day, 62%. Birds and terrestrial animals and bats are much more likely to be struck during the arrival phase of flight and compared to departure, which is about 86% at arrival and 12% at departure. So it seems like coming into land is a little more dangerous. Student pilots can review basics about wildlife hazards and reporting procedures in Chapter 7 of the Aeronautical Information Manual, and should note that wildlife is among the collision hazard risks they will be expected to manage on a practical test. And this excerpt from the practical test: a private pilot applicant must demonstrate ability to manage collision hazards such as aircraft, terrain, obstacles, wires, vehicles, vessels, persons, and wildlife. Although a number of reported strikes has dramatically increased, the number of reported damaging strikes has increased only slightly since 2010, and is still below the recorded number of 743 in 2000, whereas the number of reported strikes in the USA increased 190%, from just under 6,000 in 2000 to over 17,000 in 2019. The number of damaging strikes declined 4% from about 740 in 2000 to just over 700 in 2019. The decline in damaging strikes has been most pronounced for commercial aircraft in the airport environment. Birds make up about 97% of the strikes, mammals 3%, and reptiles less than 1%. A large number of bird strikes has resulted in major effort by United States and Canadian Air Force officials to find ways to handle this problem, including the establishment of a bird strike committee. Mammals are the most common animals other than birds, which are associated with aircraft strikes. Mammal strikes are only a small percent of the total recorded strikes, but strikes with large mammals, including deer and, in this area, antelope, are extremely dangerous. The number of white-tailed deer in the U.S. has increased from 100,000 in 1900 to 30 million in 2019. From 1990 to 2019, 1,210 civil aircraft were involved with collisions with deer. Airport planning plays an important role in bird strike hazard reduction. Proper planning of an airport can help to recognize land uses on or near airport site that can potentially attract wildlife. By controlling these land uses, bird strike hazards can be reduced. I would say areas, and this of course is at Colorado Springs. There's a pond over here that when that's full of water would tend to collect, and there's a lot more wildlife. And, sometimes after a rainstorm, you'll see quite a few of those drain catching areas, in my opinion, especially out in the practice area where we're doing low-level maneuvers that fill with water, especially after a rainstorm. And there's quite a few birds, I think, that are more prevalent at that time. In the 11-year period span, according to that report from 2009 to 2020, approximately $350 million of airport improvement program funds have been allocated for wildlife-related projects such as assessments, plans, and airport perimeter fencing. All Part 139 certificated airports have successfully completed assessments, followed by plans, while 124 of the largest GA airports have voluntarily completed assessments. The most recent assessment, I could find in the city of Colorado Springs listed bird strike incidents at the Colorado Springs Airport just from 2010 to 2015. Just looking at that 5-year period, there is quite a rise in numbers. These, of course, are the years, and these are the number of incidents. Now, these incidents can be, as you have, the airport people, I don't know what they're called, drive around the pickup truck, usually when you call the tower, or ground control, they'll send a truck out to pick up bird remains. And those incidents are filed as a report. And there's quite a few of those that I found, and those could be part of these, although they're, I can't say logistically how many of these are actual strikes that are recorded with damage from an aircraft. They are simply incidents reported of dead birds being hit by aircraft. Now, these two characters here, While the majority of these strikes are airline and commuter related, it represents an increase, as would be expected with an increase in traffic over the years. But nonetheless, the birds are out there, and all reports I reviewed listed the following birds, which the western meadowlark, of which this guy here, and the horned lark, this guy here, being the most frequent birds hit, followed by sparrows, American kestrels, cliff swallows, grasshopper larks, and red-tailed hawks. A tip from the AIM section 754 recommends that if you observe birds or animals, let's see, where am I? Observe birds or animals on or near the runway, request airport management, which is what I was saying earlier, to disperse the wildlife before taking off. Also contact the nearest FAA air traffic control, which we have here, flight surface or tower, regarding large flocks of birds, and report the geographic location, bird type, approximate numbers, altitude, direction of bird flight path. Now, those are not something that's on the strike reports, which I'll get to later. That's simply saying what you see on the ground. And I will show you one here, a report by a Peterson Aero Club flight instructor and student who were warned of this and still hit them. So being warned, you say, yeah, okay, and then boom, hit them anyway. The BASH requirements at the Aero Club, the bird strikes, Peterson Air Force Base BASH program will be briefed twice a year at safety meetings, like we're doing this time. The chief instructor or the manager will make the decision to terminate or modify flight operations during conditions of moderate or severe bird watch conditions. Sightings of large flocks of birds will be reported to base ops. All aircraft will immediately report all bird strikes and or hazardous bird activity to the chief instructor or manager. I would include the tower or ground, I guess, whenever, as we said earlier. Do not remove any remains, that remnants. And that's important of the bird strike, as 21st Safety has to take DNA samples. This includes strikes that do not cause damage. Fill out AFMAN 853 and FAA 5200-7, which we'll look at here in a minute. Give a verbal report to base ops. There's a BASH book in the manager's office, which you should have been shown when you started at the club here. Dealing with the local procedures, it's a white binder, says BASH on it. Dealing with all local procedures, locations, and concerns of BASH, each pilot is required to review the BASH book. Okay, this is the FAA 5700 or 5200-7 form, excuse me. And this is pretty obvious. Just that you need to fill these forms out if you have a strike report. If you're just calling, of course, base ops or the ground or tower to notify them of dead birds, that's really not, you do not have to file a report if you did not hit the bird. What I say interesting here, the 5200 form goes left to right and then goes down. And we'll talk about a typical report being filed in a minute here. The 583 form actually goes down this way and then goes this way. Phase of flight, parts of the aircraft that were struck. And as I point these things out, I'll show you briefly one of the reports and how what they said. And so you kind of have to be aware of certain things to fill out here. Effect on the flight, the sky condition, precipitation, the species. Well, that's hard to tell. The horned lark and the meadowlark, if it's yellow, it's probably the western meadowlark and so on, because they are very common around here. Number of birds seen or under the strike, size of the bird, and so on. Here's the AFMAN form, which is in the BASH book. And this one simply just goes this way, and then down here, and then down here. I think the only thing I saw different here was I thought there was a couple just different ways that they word these things. Special use airspace, I don't think it's on the FAA form. Low level route, as would pertain to military. Effect on the flight, that's in there. Phase of operation, that's, taxi, takeoff, roll, takeoff, initial climb, cruise, so on. Phase of operation, landing traffic pattern, landing flare rollout, missed touch and go, other, so on and so forth. So that's what these two forms look like. They should be in the BASH book, and you would be required to fill those out. Only thing I don't see in this one is not where you have to put your name. Okay. Now, this is a report from an Aero Club member, although this was back in 2003, which is the most recent one I could find on the report system. Time, day, sky, no clouds. Precipitation, none. Operator, business aircraft, Cessna 172. Less than 2,250 kilograms. Engine 1, power type, reciprocating engine, piston, registration 7902 November. Remains collected, yes. Remains sent, no. Runway 17 right, phase of flight, takeoff, run. Bird seen 1, bird struck 1, horned lark. Small, pilot warned of birds, yes. Strikes, damages, struck propeller, effect on flight, aborted takeoff, report type FAA 5200-7E. Comments, operator, Peterson Aero Club. Okay. So that's kind of how these things will be reported to the FAA. Strikes occur every day, but when compared to the total number of flights in the system, they are rare. Although it is impossible to eliminate all strikes at all times between aircraft and animals, comprehensive assessment planning and management techniques have successfully mitigated damaging strikes on or near airports. Combined with systematic evaluation and adaptation of techniques, safety can be increased one less strike at a time. Well, that concludes a review of the BASH program and the YouTube version of the March safety meeting for 2021. This is Dennis Dalton, safety officer. See you on the flight line.